Hi, everybody. Let us pause for 5 minutes to think about life, God, and the Bible. As I shared in the last two 5 minute windows, I grew up with a family member who suffers from mental illness. I am convinced that when it comes to families living with mental illness, we need to take a long view of healing. There is no such thing as an overnight miracle. Now, there might be breakthroughs along the way, but they are all steps to a long journey of recovery. I want to add one more thing. When it comes to mental wellness, there is no such thing as a one shoe fits all sizes magical formula. We live different seasons in our lives in which God provides temporary solutions. However, with the passing of one season, God's help to us changes. We are grateful to God for giving us solutions at that time, but as we go on from that, we look up to God to help us through the next season of life. It is Mental Health Week in my son's Peel District School Board in Ontario, Canada. Therefore, this week, I am sharing my reflections on mental wellness in my 5 minute windows. There is one passage in the Bible which talks about the renewing of our minds. I like to read it. Romans 12, 1-2. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. Romans 12, 1-2. These two verses contain a lot of wisdom. I want to highlight two thoughts coming from them. I start with the second thought. Please note verse 2. Paul talks about being transformed by the renewing of our minds. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Who transforms us? Who renews our minds? In verse 1, Paul advises us to offer ourselves as living sacrifices to God. Yes, when we offer ourselves to God, God transforms us. God changes us. As God changes us, He renews our minds. Therefore, the renewing of our minds is God's work in us. We can work with God to let God renew our minds, but ultimately, the renewal or the revival or the rebirth of our minds is God's work in us. This brings us to the first thought that comes from Romans 12, verse 1. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Romans 12, verse 1. Paul wants us to present ourselves to God in worship. Worship, according to Romans chapter 12, verse 1, worship is the presentation of our lives to God, not a Sunday morning experience. We can now summarize these two thoughts about the renewing of our minds: presentation and transformation. We present ourselves to God, Romans 12, verse 1. Having presented ourselves to God, God transforms us and renews our minds. Earlier, I said that I do not believe in formulas. I still agree with that. What I am presenting here is not a formula. It is a lifestyle. Every day we present ourselves to God. As a result, God transforms us and renews our minds. Pretty soon it becomes a lifestyle of presenting ourselves to God. We go on this journey with God as God transforms us and renews our minds. We do not need to work up the renewing of our minds. That is God's work. We present ourselves to God. God transforms us. presentation, and transformation. May God continue his work in us.